right, everyone. Thanks for joining our LandGate webinar, and I'd like to thank Ted Harvey at Wyoming RLI for hosting this webinar. It's because then we're doing this today, and really the goal today is introduce you folks to LandGate, what it is that we do, serving land professionals such as yourselves, and also give a fairly high overview. We're only going to be on for 45 to 50 minutes here, so can't really get too in-depth with natural resources, especially in a state like Wyoming, where you have such abundant natural resources, ranging everything from carbon sequestration, subsurface carbon injection, all the way to hard rock minerals, coal mining, things like that. So LandGate really covers that entire spectrum of natural resources, and we're going to touch on a high level today, what people really need to be aware of in the state of Wyoming, and not just within the state of Wyoming. There's surrounding states that are also going to be impacted by some recent energy additions to our economy, and what that means for folks that work with land. So we'll be covering that. Real quick, some housekeeping stuff. This webinar is being recorded. I've received multiple emails in the last probably hour or so, folks that can't make it. So not a big deal. If you know some folks that wanted to show up but weren't able to make it, this is being recorded. We're going to be sending out the recording via email, and we'll also be putting it in no blog posts. So hey, Bill, glad to see that you're on the meeting and you finished up your phone call. So happy to see you on here. Another administrative thing here, I'm completely open to questions, and I think the more questions that folks ask, the better these webinars and talks really go, because it's not me preaching at you what I think you want to know and things that you need to hear about. It's you guys asking for questions and me getting that information to you. So at any point, feel free to put questions in the chat, just as Bill did there. Also in the Q&A section, Jordan is one of our tremendous marketing folks here at LandGate, so she'll be keeping her eye on the chat in the Q&A. If you guys have any questions at any time, again, feel free to jump in there. So yeah, if there's no questions, what I'll go ahead and do is get started. And kind of the plan here is the first half of this webinar, talk about these natural resources on a high level, what's important to the state of Wyoming, folks that deal with land, and what's specific about Wyoming. We host RLI classes and real estate courses across the United States. So what we're going to be talking about with a Rocky Mountain region here, specifically Wyoming, is going to be completely different than when we go and teach a course down in Georgia or Pennsylvania or even Arizona, right? So natural resources, it's really dependent on what God's put on the property. What is there? What does the state of Wyoming have? So let me go ahead and start sharing my screen here, and we'll get into, we're going to use a little bit of material that we use for our RLI class, just to give a general understanding of what it is we're talking about when we talk about natural resources. We'll cover a wide spectrum here, but since we are focused on the state of Wyoming, obviously oil and gas is a huge proponent of, oil and gas is a huge aspect of the Wyoming economy. Most folks do not understand why oil is distributed the way that it is in the subsurface, because it's anywhere from a couple thousand to 10, 15,000 feet underneath our feet. And you can't just see through all of that rock, right? So you have to have a pretty good high technical understanding of what's going on in the subsurface. And even more importantly, you have to have a ton of data that's typically pretty expensive. You're going to see a recurring theme here that all of the data that is used for natural resource evaluation, things like that, we've democratized that and we put it out on LandGate. So it's a huge value add of folks who use LandGate. We put all of this data and information out there. So when we're talking about oil and gas data, that's going to, for the most part, be producing oil and gas reserves. Since you are in the state of Wyoming, oil and gas reserves that can still come out of the ground. certain states across the United States, the reserves that are in the ground, likely going to stay in the ground. California is a really good example. New York's a good example of that. Plenty of oil and gas reserves in those states, but regulatory issues will really not allow those resources to be extracted. State of Wyoming is in a different scenario. However, there's essentially two different states for subsurface in the state of Wyoming. And what I mean by that is if we go and look at oil and gas data in the state of Wyoming, and I'm doing all of this as a live demo here in LandGate. This isn't canned or anything. So everything you see is live. Our users can get access to this same data for $50 a month. But you see the state of Wyoming here. Nice square there, but you see all of this data being populated on the map that typically isn't associated with land. You can see the Powder River Basin here up in the northeast part of the state. Down here in the southeast portion of the state is the Denver-Julesburg Basin. Then you have the Green River Basin in the southern and southwest portion of the state. You see all of these dots here and all of these green symbols. Those are producing oil and gas wells. The orange symbols that you see, those are permits. So those are wells that are soon to be drilled or they have permission to drill. So it gives you a really good view of where oil and gas activity is active in the state of Wyoming. Obviously, in the state of Wyoming, there's not a whole lot of places that oil and gas activity is not taking place, just because it is a very, very rich resource for that state. But this data alone is extraordinarily expensive, or at least it used to be. So we put all of that data in one place and can allow you to see that. Then once we have all of this technical natural resource data, we append that to parcels so that you don't need to be, an oil and gas geologist or an engineer or a solar engineer or a forester to understand all of these different attributes. But we roll that up into a parcel value, and I'll show you that later. But back to my previous point that you kind of have two different states when it comes to minerals for oil and gas. In the state of Wyoming, you have private fee minerals, where private individuals or even the state of Wyoming own minerals. And in that case, most of the southeast portion of the state of Wyoming down here in the Denver-Julesburg Basin, most of this stuff is either state or the majority of it is privately owned minerals, meaning that the state of Wyoming can grant a permit and give an operator or a developer the opportunity to come and extract those resources and pay that mineral owner a royalty because that's who actually owns the resources, the mineral owner. Now, if you get further north up into the Powder River Basin, which just a quick background myself, I went to the Colorado School of Mines and got a master's degree there and was very, very fortunate to study under what I consider some of the best geologic minds in the oil and gas industry. I'll quote them on this, that the Powder River Basin could be the most untapped oil resources in the United States. It's a phenomenal resource for the state and the state of Wyoming. But if you look through ownership of minerals through this portion of the state, a lot of these sections are owned by the federal government. So they're BLM land, which requires federal approval for permits, operations, and things like that. And that can really slow development down. And we've seen a significant amount of that in the Powder River Basin. So that's what I kind of mean by two different states within the state of Wyoming as far as minerals go. But that's what we're talking about with oil and gas. Why you see extraordinarily high concentrations of oil and gas wells in certain areas and not in others is, about 100 million years worth of geology. It's at one point, there was a small ocean, or not a small ocean, actually a very large ocean that went from basically Utah all the way over to Iowa, essentially. And it was a small inland sea. And I say small because it was only anywhere from 1,000 to 500 feet deep, depending on what scientist you talk to. But during that time, all of the stuff that was living in the water column was dying and falling down to the bottom of that seaway, and it was being stored as organic matter. Over millions and millions of years, that organic matter stacked up and essentially built these mats of organic content that was later going to be cooked and turned into oil and gas. As you know, well, there's mountain ranges through a lot of the state of Wyoming now. Those mountain ranges did not exist then. So this was all very, very flat. But as these mountain ranges start poking up, what it did is leave certain areas where these organic rich rocks still exist, or we call these sedimentary basins. So these are just collections of old rock over millions and millions of years where all of this dead stuff is located. That dead stuff gets compacted, it gets buried, it gets cooked, and it gets cooked into oil and gas. And that's why you have certain areas where a proliferation of oil and gas, and then you have certain areas where there is no oil and gas. The reason why is those rocks don't exist anymore. All that dead stuff has been eroded off, put into the rivers, and is now likely in the Gulf of Mexico because it's flowed down a bunch of rivers. So that's it, oil and gas in a nutshell of why you have oil and gas in certain areas and not others. And again, oil and gas are a very, very critical industry to the state of Wyoming. It's going to continue to play an enormous role. We'll switch gears a little bit about the natural resources that you really need to be aware of in the state of Wyoming. Right? It's no surprise, oil and gas, absolutely be aware of it. On the mineral side, when we talk about minerals, we're talking about like hard rock minerals, things like that. Mining minerals, coal, obviously an enormous resource, especially for Powder River Basin. But what you can see here is another very, very granular technical data layer that we put onto the state of Wyoming. So depending on what resource you're looking at a completely different state, right? We were just looking at oil and gas data, where those oil and gas minerals are located. When we're talking about mining, well, now we're talking about a completely different set of rocks, a different age of rocks, and a different purpose of why people are targeting rocks. So instead of finding all of those old rocks and those sedimentary basins where dead stuff used to live and it turned into oil and gas, well, now they're looking for where are these mountain ranges where extraordinarily old rocks are located, and they could contain gold, or they could contain what I think is going to be a very big industry in the state of Wyoming coming in the next 5 to 15 years, is where the rare earth elements, where the lithium mines for car batteries, things like that. But this is showing you a different view, right? And very quickly, just using LandGate, I clicked over to the minerals, clicked on mineral resources, and I can see a snapshot of where these different types of bedrock are located. If I'm doing business up here in the northeast part of the state, the minerals that are likely going to be attributed to land transactions are going to be completely different than if I'm over here in the Lander area and I'm dealing with something more close to the like igneous intrusions and things like that. I can also flip over and take a look at the mines. Now, these are color coded. This is proprietary data to LandGate of how these mine locations are color coded, but it's based upon whether we're looking at rare earth element classifications. And I'll touch on that briefly, why that's important. We're going to touch on solar battery storage, electrical vehicle charging, things like that in the state of Wyoming. For those thinking, it's not here yet, it is here. It's in the state of Wyoming, and it's coming in a big way. But what really allows those other energy additions, I'm not going to use the word transition, but those energy additions to the grid are what we call rare earth elements. There's a country that has been in the news quite a bit lately, and for good reason. But China controls the vast majority of rare earth elements on the planet. United States is, I think, right around 10 or 12%. But we consume the vast majority of those. So rare earth elements are going to be critical. And you can see rare earth elements, they're colored this nice little turquoise color here. And if I zoom into a couple areas where there are rare earth elements, these have either been they've been found for an occurrence, or their discovery, or they're an active mine. But you can see these mines in certain areas. I'd say 99% of land professionals that I've talked with have never even considered rare earth elements, critical minerals, lithium mines, things like that, when they're either buying or selling property, unless it's on the property specifically. What's really cool about these types of resources is, and we'll take a look at these rare earth mines here and some of these rare earth mines there. is you can see that they fall within certain types of bedrock. So there was some rare earth mines here that fall within that certain type of bedrock. There's some rare earth mines that fall through here during this type of bedrock. This is critical information for people to know about and understand, because the bedrock through this area is completely different, and the minerals that lie within them are completely different than these minerals. Now, this is not a tool for geologists. Again, this is a tool for land professionals and realtors. We give you the information you need to know. That's one thing that I really disliked about graduate school geology. You had all of these very specific terms that even for folks studying it went completely over their head. It's like, what, why do we need a specific? And I understand why we need specifics in the scientific perspective, but for the application of things, it can really be brought down to a level that it's digestible, and that's what we've really tried to do here. But mining is going to be it plays a big role in the economy of the state of Wyoming, but in my opinion, it's going to play a much larger role. You'll probably see a little bit of reduction from the coal mining. For those that don't know this, coal consumption is at record highs in history. So coal's not going away anytime soon. Oil and gas is not going away anytime soon. So, and I'll do a quick disclaimer here. I'm not a proponent of any one way, shape, or form of natural resources. I think that the more energy that the world has, the cheaper that it can be and the more reliable it can be, the better everyone does, especially poor people. So that's kind of the stance we take. Let's get as much information out there so we can utilize these resources. But coal mining is going to continue to play a really big part of what the state of Wyoming does for mining, but you're going to see some additionality there for some of the critical minerals and rare earth minerals there. So these are what we would all consider traditional energy resources. A massive amount of capital has been going into these industries for the last 100 years or so. I mean, drilling around here, the basin margins of the Powder River Basin, I mean, that's been going on since the late 1800s, and it continues today. Salt Creek is a very large oil and gas field right here on the edge of the basin. Salt Creek's been drilled since the early 1900s, and there's still drilling activity there. It's a phenomenal resource. But we're going to shift gears a little bit to what we would consider non-traditional energy sources that's coming in a very big way to the state of Wyoming.
So Craig, Ted does have a question really quickly. He says, is the state Wyoming investing in rare earth mining for the next 10 to 20 years?
The state of Wyoming, likely not, Ted. That's a good question. And the state of Wyoming doesn't really invest in anything. They own massive amounts of resources and minerals. They're the same as a landowner. They're a royalty owner, right? The capital that is invested and historically has been invested into oil and gas, mining, things like that, that's come from Wall Street, right? That's come from your large investment groups, hedge funds, private equity groups, venture capitalist groups. Trillions of dollars being invested, not only just in the United States, but massive amounts of money being invested in the state of Wyoming. If you've been watching capital markets, things like that over the last 5 to 3 years, massive decreases in the amount of capital flowing into those industries. Now, these are enormous industries, so there's still a significant amount of capital moving in there to keep rigs running in Powder River Basin, to keep coal mines open, things like that. You are seeing a huge reduction in that, though, and you've seen that in towns like Gillette, Wright, Wyoming. That they're not producing as much coal as they used to. Still producing a massive amount of coal, but not as much as they used to. You're going to probably continue to see that decrease over time. The capital that will be the same amount of capital is being spent, but it's being spent in other areas, and we're going to talk about that: solar, wind, battery storage, EV charging. We're not quite seeing it on the mining side yet, Ted. If you look at the capital allocations for the mining industry, so capital expenses, things like that, that's being spent on finding new resources and developing and bringing them into the market. In North America, the United States especially, it's still been a significant juxtaposition, right? You have massive commodity prices. Copper is historically high, gold historically high, silver historically high. Molybdenum, same thing. So you have these record high commodity prices, but historic low capital expenditures to go find new resources. It takes a long time for a mine to come, for these hard rock mines to come online. You can have a discovery for oil and gas, prove it up, and within 2 or 3 years, I mean, you're rolling. You know, you might have a 4 or 5 rig program and you're drilling it up. That's not necessarily the way it works in mining. These are very long-term projects. So when you throw the number 10 to 20 years, I would say right now, from an exploration perspective, it's happening. It's happening right now. These are not new conversations. People know that we're going to need the lithium. People don't realize one of the best lithium locations in the country is the Black Hills of South Dakota, which actually geologically, if we look at this, the rocks themselves fold into and are a big part of the northeast part of Wyoming. So lithium is going to be a big part of the Black Hills, and it has historically. We just quit mining it, but it's going to be coming. The exploration, things like that, that's happening right now. There's scientists putting together prospects. There's a really, really big gold mine prospect that you all should probably be aware of if you're doing business in the state of Wyoming, just outside of Cheyenne, Wyoming. It sits right here. A very interesting gold prospect. Thousands of ounces of recoverable, and multi-thousands of ounces of recoverable gold, but it sits right there, and you can actually see where those historic mining locations are. But it's a really interesting prospect. But these projects they're happening, right? So they're at the exploration phase right now, Ted. You're going to need to get funding, and then they'll have to essentially prove and appraise the projects, and then go into a development or production phase. The state of Wyoming, very, very open to those type of developments. Again, on state and private land, I think that it's going to be a very, very good thing for the state of Wyoming. On federal acreage, it might be a little bit tougher. I think that even on federal acreage, rare earth elements and critical elements such as lithium, things needed for the next phase that we're going to talk about, I think those are going to get a pretty strong green light, just because of all of the additionality we're going to see over the next 5 to 15 years. I mean, battery storage is going to be an enormous part of the electricity grid. Whether my personal feelings about it are irrelevant. Anybody listening, your personal feelings about it are somewhat irrelevant. It's understanding what's coming and how that you can best serve your clients with it. So battery storage is going to be a huge part. It's going to take enormous amounts of minerals to achieve the goals that some of these battery storage folks are putting out there. So the minerals have to come from the ground somewhere. I hope that answers your question, Ted. But again, what we've talked about up until now: historic energy production, historic energy investments, things like that. Again, commodity prices. This is everything from oil and gas to mining minerals. Commodity prices, historic highs. I mean, we saw natural gas touch $8, $9 an MCF short few months ago. I mean, we're back down to below $2 an MCF now. Oil, who knows what oil is going to do? OPEC just said that they were going to cut some of their production, so we're back up above 80 at this point, but still relatively high oil prices from a historical perspective. The mineral side, the mineral commodities, extraordinarily high commodity prices, but all of those industries are sharing the same thing right now: severe reduction in capital that would turn on new resources. Okay, so all of these resources are kind of on the decline. It doesn't mean that there's not any left. It means that the amount of capital being invested in it is leading to a decrease in the amount of production. So where's all that capital going? That's what a lot of people ask. Okay, well, where's the money going? There's still massive investments being made. The majority of those investments are going into what we should probably spend most of the topic or the day on is solar energy to a lesser extent wind. A lot of that wind development, we'll touch on wind really quickly because I want to spend more time on solar than we do wind. Even though, ironically, I'm saying that who knows how hard the wind is blowing in Southeast Wyoming right now. If anybody's in Southeast Wyoming right now, let us know how hard the wind is blowing. One of the windiest states in, perhaps one of the windiest places on the planet, the state of Wyoming. That's an enormous amount of energy that's flowing through the air, things like that. But we're seeing a further push, not so much onshore wind turbines. We're seeing a stronger push for offshore wind turbines. There's multiple reasons for that. You can put larger turbines, huge, enormous turbines offshore, and you don't have as much of a human issue. I think we're seeing some environmental issues with that. And by the way, every single natural resource has environmental issues and human issues. So I'm not trying to play one side or the other. But there's increasing pushback, I think, on the wind side because it takes up enormous swaths of land and they're big, right? So not everybody likes looking at them. Solar, in my opinion, I think is going to be the far greater additionality in the United States. And that's what we're seeing right now on the investment side. For those that are saying, well, solar is great, but I mean, if we look at this, we just look at the data, even, put opinions aside because, everybody has one, most of them, don't matter. But if we look at this data, and this is available on LandGate and to all the users, all of these little solar panel emblems here, these, if they're green, those are active solar farms. So you can see a ton of those things in the Front Range of Colorado. You're looking at orange ones, those are currently being built. And then these yellow ones, those are planned. Those are solar farms that will be coming. If we look at the state of Wyoming, there's not a whole lot going on. Even in Nebraska, not a whole lot going on. South Dakota, North Dakota, Montana, not a whole lot of solar that has been put onto production yet. What I will say is that has nothing to do with what current activity is taking place right now. There's huge projects going on in the state of Wyoming. Some of these landowners and land agents have gotten their deals pushed through utilizing the LandGate platform, simply listing their land on LandGate to lease, not to sell. That's an important thing to note. You have a client that has a high value solar battery storage EV charging location. You do not want them to sell that piece of property. That is the most valuable property that you will ever likely transact on. So you want to help them make revenue on it. You want to help them get cash flow, and you want to help them lease that property. And that's part of the LandGate platform. But Wyoming generates an enormous amount of power. When I say power, I mean electricity. So this is another piece of data that we offer to our subscribers. You can zoom in and we'll focus on one area here in Platte County, just outside of Wheatland. There's an enormous power plant out here. It's an amazing piece of engineering. Generates at one time was the cheapest power in the country. I think it actually still is, but enormous amounts of power. Well, I don't know if you've seen the news, but Tri-State and some of the other owners of this power plant, they're going to be retiring this thing a little bit early. So where are the electrons going to come from? The answer from Tri-State and some of these other utilities, it's going to come from solar power. So wherever you see these red lines, these are transmission lines, these little yellow dots, these are substations. These are like the veins for electricity, where lights come on, where our water well pumps work, things like that. Without these transmission lines, there's no way to get the electrons there. So if you remove the amount of electrons that are being generated from a certain area, that just basically drains those veins and they're empty. They have to be filled back up with electrons. So what solar developers and energy companies are doing is they're looking for areas of where's the infrastructure already in place. You're going to see a lot more transmission line projects, substations being built over the next 10 to 20 years. But for now, they're looking for what infrastructure is currently in place. And before I keep going, I see that there's something in the chat.
Yeah, it's about CO2 storage.
Perfect. So yes, Jeff, we do. We'll get to that here I'm going to try to get through the solar stuff, battery storage stuff, and then at the end we can touch on some carbon sequestration and storage, because that's going to be coming to Wyoming in a big way as well. But real quick, I just want to show you guys how I would use this tool. If I'm a land agent and I'm trying to expand my business, or maybe land listings are slowing down, but I know a lot of landowners around this wheatland area. Let's say I'm a realtor in this wheatland area. I know a ton of landowners. I know none of them are going to sell, especially right now because they've started receiving offer letters to lease or to buy or something like that. So there's no way they're going to sell right now. But I still am a land professional and I'm not getting listings. I want to participate in this. There's trillions of dollars that's going to be spent over the next several years on this stuff, and I want to participate in it. What I can do and what LandGate does really well is, without having to know really much about the technical details of any of these specific parcels, all I have to do is select, let's go ahead and just click on a portfolio that I've created. So these are just a couple parcels here. I can quickly filter and take a look at the infrastructure data right next to this power plant. So it's going to be very high value. But if I know this landowner, what I can do for them, rather than sit down with them or try to make my own PowerPoint presentation and show them all of this different type of information, from crop land data, developed land data, they really, as granular as a detail of view of their property as they've likely ever seen, and walking them through all of these things, from topography to, the amount of trees and the different species on the parcel, the different types of soil, the different types of carbon sequestration that can be allowed, the different minerals. What I can do very quickly is build them in a portfolio in my CRM tool. And this is one of the products that I think most of our land professionals really like. I can generate a report for them that summarizes all of those different technical attributes on their property very quickly. So I've went ahead and done that for some parcels, but before I show you what it is, I'm going to show you some features. I can include the land values, solar, wind, carbon, mining, oil and gas. I can customize this to show them the resources that I want, but then I can make this report my own, right? I don't want to send them a LandGate report, because then they're probably just going to go to LandGate. So what I can do is I can upload my own company logo. I can upload my own personal picture. I can put my information in here, and I'm lifting Neil's, if any of you know Neil, he's a good partner of ours, but I'm just using him as a demonstration here. I can essentially build out my own report. So when I show this to the landowner, and this is an example of what this report looks like by clicking a button, it's my branding. So I can have my logo, I can name the property whatever I want. Here's a nice picture of myself and some details about myself. But the really cool stuff here is all of that information we were looking at. I can get a land value. What is the actual land if it was to transact? What is the, we see some pivots here, and that's going to be broken down. The crops that are in those pivots, the pasture land, if there was woodland, that was all going to be broken down. And I can also adjust this value. That's a huge caveat to understand. You folks on this call, you are the land professionals. I'm not going to sit here and say this is exactly what this land will transact at. We're pretty darn close. We don't put any values on buildings, houses, things like that. But when it comes to the land, we're pretty darn close, but we're not exact. So you can go in this tool and you can adjust these numbers specifically. If the pasture land is a little bit low, well, you can bump that up. If the woodland's a little bit high, you can bring that down. You can customize this number if you want. But what's really important is, well, if I was to lease this property, how much money is that landowner going to make, right? So there gives you the lease value for solar, for wind, for voluntary offset carbon credits, and we'll touch on those briefly here at the end. And what are the oil and gas minerals? If they own the minerals, what are they worth? Both from a leasing perspective and a sale perspective. So I can get a really good understanding of what is on this property. Again, for the land details, it's going to give them a breakdown. How many acres of cropland, developed pasture land, woodland do you have? what's the value of each one of those components. And this is based, again, off of your customized numbers that you've put in here. Some additional details here of, just interesting things on the property: elevation, slopes, wind speeds, average wind speeds, precipitation, things like that. But they're really, really difficult data to get. And the huge value for this particular parcel, the solar. Where can you build? How many buildable acres do you have? Just because you have a 20,000 acre ranch and it's sitting on top of transmission lines, well, you might only have a couple hundred acres of buildable acres just due to the topography. You can find out how much of that you have very quickly just by generating one of these reports. But really granular information, and I'd love to go through this in a little bit more detail, but we don't have time today. But this is across the board. It doesn't matter if this is someone who has owned this property and it's been in the family since the late 1800s, or if this is someone who's just bought the property in the last couple of years and there's an investment property or a land bank for them and they're wanting to make revenue. These reports teach people about their property, because this is very expensive data that typically they've never been exposed to. So if I keep looking through this report, it shows everything that we kind of went through: transmission lines. It will show you on the substations, power plants, proximities to all of these things. And then some cool stuff on the carbon side, which grasslands, pasture lands in the Rocky Mountain region, really, really low carbon values because we don't get a lot of rain here. No surprise. I mean, we're essentially live in a high desert. The Great Plains is you're either in a drought or you're getting flooded out. So that doesn't yield very high for the types of soils that are good for carbon credits. However, in some of the more mountainous areas where you have timber stands, the forestry carbon credits can be somewhat lucrative there. Again, not as high as they would be in the Appalachian region or the Pacific Northwest, but again, additional value that most people don't consider. This report tells you about that. It'll tell you the different tree species, the number of trees per acre per species, and the number of carbon credits for those trees. So that's good information to have. Breaks it down on the soil types as well. Again, a very granular report. There's some of those hard rock minerals we talked about. Looks like there's a small gold discovery not too far away. But all of these different factors that are important on the property. One thing that is a tool that we created, and we created this as a request from some of the world's largest energy companies who actually use a very similar tool to this. They have a couple more bells and whistles, but they pay a heck of a lot more than $50 a month as well for those bells and whistles. They requested, because they send out mailers as well, right? The energy industry on the buy side, they send mailers, just like you guys send mailers. So one request they had is they loved the report, they loved all of that information, but they didn't want to do it one by one, right? They didn't want to go through for every single person and select and build a portfolio and send and print off a PDF and then put it into an envelope and mail it out. So we created a tool to make that process much quicker. An example that I used here was I used LandGate to do a parcel search. You saw that, as you zoom in, you can see all of these different parcels across the US. But since we have all of the data tied to it, and I wanted to go and say, maybe even after this webinar, say, okay, well, I want to look in my county, or I want to look in this part of the state. I know a lot of landowners, but I don't know all of them. And Craig's told me that, okay, I need to be within 2 miles of a substation and I need to have buildable acres. That's a huge, huge component. Buildable acres. Just because you have 2,000 acres doesn't mean that you have 2,000 buildable acres for whatever reasons. Wetlands, right-of-ways, oil and gas wells, topography issues, whatever it is. But I can use the algorithms within LandGate to actually define very, very quickly across the entire state or whatever area I'm searching, what are the parcels that are of high value that fit my search criteria. And whether there's folks that use this search criteria And they don't do anything with solar. They don't do anything with wind. They don't do anything with natural resources. They're just using this tool to locate parcels that they actually want to talk with. I mean, you just do a basic parcel search on size and send a custom mailer to them. And I'm going to show you what that looks like. I went ahead and selected all of the high value parcels in the state of Wyoming. I think it was 250 buildable acres within a certain distance of a substation. All of those parcels were put into a portfolio where I can manage all of these parcels. I can take notes. It's like a CRM system. It is a CRM system where if I send out all the mailers to these folks, I can keep track of who's called me back, who said no, who said yes, and I can visually track them on this platform. But I think what's really cool, what most people really like, is they like sending those personalized reports to each individual one of these folks. So what I would do very quickly after, doing my search, finding the 3,000 parcels, that search took probably, I think, 45 seconds to find all of these 3,000 parcels, but I put them into a portfolio, and now I can go ahead and start making my mailer campaign. I'm not putting stamps on anything. I'm not putting anything in an envelope. LandGate does everything. The only thing I need to do as a land professional is make this my report. So I can go ahead and select in here, do I want to group parcels by an owner? So if there's an owner that has 5 parcels, I'm not sending 5 individual reports for 5 parcels. I'm going to send one report for all 5 of that, for all 5 parcels into one property. So I can select that. I can exclude businesses. So if I don't want to waste my money sending it to Anadarko Petroleum, well, I'm going to click that button and I'm not going to send mailers to the federal government or whoever it is, because they're likely not going to call me back. So I don't want to waste my money on them. So I can exclude those things, and it gives me real quick output. Out of the 3,000 parcels I selected, I'm going to be sending 561 mailers total out to the state of Wyoming based on the criteria that I've set. I'm going to, again, upload the logo for my company. I'm going to upload my personal picture. I'm going to upload my name, my title, my information. Same thing as we did on the individual report, but this is going to go out to 561 different landowners. Now, what's really cool about this is not a typical mailer that you just, somebody gets it in their mailbox. They see, okay, I don't know who this is, and they throw it in the trash. This mailer shows up in the mailbox looking just like this. So it comes in an envelope. It's a full page envelope, and the front of it's clear. Now, obviously, this is not the report, but I just wanted to show you that's the envelope that it comes in. So when I show you the next page of what the landowner's actually getting when they open their mailbox, it's your report, it's your branding, and this sticky note is anything that you want to put in here. You can see this is a demo, so you can see I'm actively updating that, and I can make this thing look however I want. I can change the color of this sticky note. I can change the color of the text, because a sticky note goes right on the front of that clear envelope. I can select what types of features I want to show on each individual property. And then when I'm done, this is what they're going to see. This is that first page, again, in this clear envelope. So when they open their mailbox, this is what they see. They see your sticky note from you with your phone number. They see your branding, and they see their property. They see their parcel, and you're giving them information. You're telling them how much their land is worth. Again, you can customize this land value. So you can put bounds. You can either, this don't put a value above this or below that. You can customize this number, but you're giving them information, right? So Rodney is learning here that he's got $1.4 million. If this stuff is worth $528 an acre, again, that I can adjust, I'm telling him his stuff's worth about 1.4. His solar, fairly low value, about $114 an acre a year. Wind value, pretty high. Carbon, very low carbon value. Oil and gas minerals, pretty low as well, because there's no activity. He's going to keep looking through this. The next page, There's a picture of myself, some information about me. And now I'm going to start educating this guy. Well, where are these numbers coming from? Here's a summary, solar, wind, land values. Here's a breakdown of the land usage on that property. Again, I'm going to be sending this. All I got to do is click one more button and I'm done. I'm sending this report to 561 different individuals specifically for their property. But I'm going to tell him how much different types of woodland he has on his property, the different cropland they have, some information about his property. I'm going to tell him about the topography on his property, slopes, elevations, things like that. The trees, the different tree species. So this individual has ponderosa pine and cottonwood saplings. You're going to tell him how many different trees per acre he has. I'm going to tell him about his soils on his property. I'm going to tell him about his solar values, how many acres he has, about 2,700 acres. Well, he can only build on about 1,100. And they're not super high value because he's just on the edge of where high value stuff is. So here's my heat map on this side of the property, likely because of the proximity to substation transmission lines. It's higher value, but he doesn't have a lot of buildable acreage over here either. So I'm going to educate him on that. Here's the wind information, high value stuff for wind. Here is the electrical infrastructure, transmission line running through the property. Here's my carbon information, mining information. So I'm going to send this to 561 individuals. What we've seen with typical mailing campaigns is anywhere, and you know, this is just from my background in the energy side, anywhere from 0.5% to 1% success rate on typical mailing campaigns. What we're seeing with callback rates on this is anywhere from 60 to 70%. That's multiple orders of magnitude increase in efficiency on that. So they're working very, very well. We've worked very hard. We're still working on this. We're still tweaking. We're always going to be to improving this report. But this is a very popular thing that a lot of folks are using for their mailing campaigns right now. There's some other tools and stuff in here that I'd love to show you. We don't have enough time. I know that I've already probably overwhelmed a significant amount of you, which I don't want to do, but I do want to make sure that you are all aware that this tool exists, that this tool is out there. There's a lot of just simple use cases. You don't have to be able to do everything all at one time to utilize this tool. It's $50 a month, right? So we have folks that the only thing they do is just run their mailing campaigns through this. For $50 a month, they're still saving enormous amounts of money. The mailing campaigns are a pay to play. So the more mailers I send out, the more I pay on the more I'm going to pay, because I pay per mailer on that. We have some folks that just simply manage their listings, manage their clients and leads in this CRM system, so they keep track of everything on a map. And we have some other folks that use this as an investor. It's pretty funny. They're realtors, but now that they have all of this additional information, they're actually going out buying property on behalf of themselves because they know more than everybody else out there who's selling. So there's a lot of different use cases for that. I do want to touch quickly before we go on carbon credits and carbon sequestration. So let's go back in here. When we talk, there's two different types. When we mention carbon, think of it in two different ways. There's surface carbon. So we would call those voluntary offsets. How much vegetation is on the property? How much carbon dioxide is the surface of this property sequestering and pulling out of the atmosphere through photosynthesis every year? That's voluntary offsets that's tied to the surface. So that's timber, that's farming, ranching, things like that. The other aspect of carbon credits for landowners and land professionals is going to be carbon capture and sequestration. So that's going to be subsurface carbon. That's where they will pull, in an industrial way, they will pull carbon dioxide either off of scrubbers from power plants or out of direct capture out of the atmosphere, and they will concentrate that CO2 and pump it down in the subsurface to be sequestered that way. The subsurface component, a lot of the criteria is going to be very similar to oil and gas. So The criteria that is required to find locations to drill a new well and pump carbon dioxide in the ground is you cannot be too close. Let's go down to Southeast Wyoming, because this is going to be a big part of Southeast Wyoming. You cannot be too close to where old oil and gas wells or existing oil and gas wells are already located, because those are potential leak points for your high pressure carbon that's going into the subsurface. They want it to be a tomb. They don't want it coming back out. So you don't want a bunch of holes poked in it where you could potentially leak that carbon dioxide out. Real quickly, carbon dioxide, I'm exhaling it right now. That's what it's plant food essentially. So it's not toxic. It's part of our atmosphere. Without it, plants would die. Without plants, we would die. So carbon dioxide, it's not toxic at all. That's a couple of questions some landowners asked me, is like, is it going to poison my aquifer? Is it going to do damage, this and that? No, the risk though, there is a risk, and we'll talk really quickly about it, is seismicity. So you're taking a volume, you're pumping it downhole, and you are changing pressure. You're changing pore pressure in the subsurface. What that can sometimes lead to is, and it hasn't happened in Southeast Wyoming, it's happened in a few places where they've injected a lot of water into areas where there are faults, known faults, and that can cause small earthquakes, things like that. So there is a risk to it, but hopefully there's enough regulations and there's enough science now at this point that they understand the mass balance of how much volume can we inject in the subsurface without increasing the pressure too much. Okay, so that's the one caveat there at least to be aware of. But if we look at Southeast Wyoming, you see all of these black dots that are on the map we're seeing there. There we go. All these black dots, these are all old vertical oil and gas wells. So all of these wells were producing at one time. They're no longer producing. They're probably plugged and abandoned. If you were to go drive to one of these areas, you probably wouldn't see anything because the surface has been reclaimed, but there is still a hole that goes thousands of feet down in the ground. So it's not a great idea to drill a new well where you have all of these holes and inject carbon dioxide into it, because now you have these leak points. However, since you have all of these holes in the ground, geologists and engineers know where the depths of the formations are that they need to inject into. So if we click on, let me click on one of these wells and you guys can see what the subsurface looks like here really quick. Turn that off. If I click on one of these wells, again, you get access to all of this data with your subscription. But since all of these holes have been drilled in certain areas, they have a really good understanding of the depths of where these formations are at. So if I'm looking at the different stacks of rock here, and let's say we want to inject into this Lions formation, which was I don't know the exact age, but it's somewhere between probably 250 and 200 million years old. Somewhere between there. I could be off, but it's old rock. But these were very old sand dunes, good porosity where you can find the dunes, things like that, and they want to inject carbon dioxide into it. They need to know the approximate depth. If they've drilled through this rock a bunch of times, well, they know relatively where these depths are going to be. So you want to be close to oil and gas activity. You want to be close to where oil and gas wells have been drilled in the past, but you don't want to be too close that it's a risk to potentially have a leak for your carbon dioxide. So what you'll see, and we're seeing this right now, is what has been considered marginal areas for oil and gas, where there has not been a whole lot of production royalty payments being made. It's the mineral owners that have been waiting for 50 years for a good well to be drilled on their property, even though their brother, their cousin 10 miles away is making X amount per month off of their oil and gas wells. It's going to be in these marginal type areas where they know the depths of the rock, they know the geology, but there isn't a lot of holes poked in the ground. So that's essentially where that forefront is going to be coming. There's leases, offers being made now I can say from the ones that I've seen, they are competitive. The carbon sequestration, at least the dollar per acre amounts on the lease bonus, they are competitive with what I've seen recently for oil and gas leasing. So it can be substantial. What it's going to turn into, then this is a brand new thing, guys. This is, an industry that's 18 months old. So it's going to develop, it's going to change. I'm just giving you the information that we have now. That's essentially what they're looking for. Obviously, it's the opposite of oil and gas. They drill oil and gas wells where the resources in the subsurface, and then they build all of these pipelines to take the resource away to where it's being consumed. It's kind of the opposite where they're looking for carbon dioxide. They will look and see where are CO2 pipelines or where are sources of carbon dioxide, which you can see on this map. These are carbon dioxide emitting facilities. Where are sources of carbon dioxide? And then where does the geology line up? Where does the well counts add up? And that's likely where they're going to start, at least initially in the Rockies from what I've seen. So we are at the top of the hour. My throat is dry. I've been talking for 56 minutes straight, and I'm happy if there's any questions right now. I will happily take those. For those that were here the whole time, I appreciate it. I hope it was worth your time. Again, we're recording it, and there will be you'll get that in an email. So if there's no questions, I'll give a little bit of time here. Maybe I put everybody to sleep. Strong possibility there. Thanks, Bill. Hopefully that was beneficial. How do the carbon credits works for woodlands? Okay, we'll touch on that real quick. Woodlands. And I think real quick, I'll just touch on the voluntary surface carbon offsets. Agriculture ones are very, very difficult right now. They're long-term contracts. They don't pay the landowner very well. The woodlands forestry type can be beneficial to landowners from what I've seen. Essentially, what you're looking at with a forestry offset carbon credit is if there's a risk to that timber being harvested, whether it's been thinned or it has been harvested in the past, or there's could potentially harvest it in the future, what will happen is there are carbon developers who will pay that landowner to essentially not cut their trees down. So if you have a landowner, they'll never sell, but they own 40,000 acres of woodland in the Bighorn Mountains, and they're hunting it, they're doing some recreation, they're making revenue that way, and they need to continue to try to make some revenue any way they can. That might be an opportunity for them. You come to them and say, hey, I can maybe help you make some carbon credits. Would you like me to go ahead and list that for you? Not to sell, but to go ahead and create a listing for carbon credits, get that out there, see what kind of offers come in. I know some folks in the Appalachia region, different metrics, things like that. They've signed some pretty strong contracts there. So that's what we're talking about on the woodland side. Essentially, if there's a risk for timber to be harvested, someone will pay that individual to potentially not cut their trees down. So not going to become a millionaire by doing it, but it's a really, really good way to start networking, things like that. What kind of numbers are those going for on the woodlands? It's paid by per ton. So it's not paid by acre, which is what I'm saying on the pasture side. You're going to need a couple 100,000 acres to really, really make that landowner a lot of money. They're going to need a massive amount of property because it only sequesters 0.3 to 0.4 tons per acre. Now on the forestry side, even in the Rocky Mountains, you can get some decent numbers. I mean, it doesn't rain as much here, it doesn't snow as much here as it does in the Pacific Northwest or Appalachia, but you can get up to 3-4 tons per acre per year. Okay, so let's think of that really quick. Each acre is sequestering, let's say, 3 tons per year of carbon. That carbon you can probably get paid anywhere from $8 to $12 per ton. Okay, so $8 to $12 per ton, 3 tons per acre. If you've got sizable forestland property, it can be significant because again, it's an order of magnitude more sequestration that's taking place than on pasture land. Let's get in the chat here. working with a reforestation company that sells. That's a great point, Bill. So I was talking about the what is called harvest deferral carbon credits. There's multiple different types of carbon credit, even within each genre, if you will. So forestry, agriculture, ranching, things like that. There is a company out there, very well-funded company, very credible company, that they're going in areas and they're reforesting. So in an area where there has been a burn, wildfire, or maybe even harvesting, they'll come in and they'll pay the landowner carbon credits to reforest their property. So that's a fairly new program that's came about in probably the last 12 months. And you're going to see more of these programs develop over time, but those are two really good ones. Thanks for reminding me of that, Bill. Can you briefly touch on how your lead system works? So we are going to be changing the user interface in a month or two. We've been working on it for probably 6 months, where the marketplace itself, I don't know if you saw on the lead thing or in the lead portion there, so we didn't have time to get to that, but there are a lot of listings up on LandGate right now of just realtors and landowners selling fee property, just land listings. Those are all going to be public in the next probably month or two. So it is going to be a very similar marketplace as far as land listings go to what you'd see with a Lands of America. Now, we don't charge anything. We don't charge anything at all to put your listings up on our site, but it'll be very similar to like a CoStar product or something else. Then I know CoStar is what people think of CoStar in this meeting likely, but yeah, we're going to be putting those listings up. And there's a lot of those up right now. On the lead side, every once in a while, landowners will enter the website, they'll get a report, they'll look at their property because they get this information for free for their specific property. They can get a report, they can do all of these things, but they still want to work with a land professional like the folks on this call. In those cases, we're not brokers, we don't represent landowners, we don't do any of that. We will send those leads to folks who are in their area. So we are doing that for the folks that use use the platform and are paying users. Again, it's $50 a month. It's paid by month. It's not a year-long subscription. It's month by month, and it's $50 a month. My Spotify subscription costs almost that, and all it does is play music that I could listen to for free on YouTube. I'm not really sure why I do it, but there's that. And then let me see, there's one more. Does your platform have any information CO2 storage program Tallgrass is currently doing in Laramie County? So without, there's no details about that specific project. It's not going to be just limited to them, right? So it's going to be leases that go out to any mineral owner where the roll front, where you have your injection well here, there's going to be an area where the carbon dioxide invades the pore space of the subsurface, and all of those mineral owners are going to, surface owners, excuse me, are going to need to have leases with that. So it's not just going to be Tallgrass, it's going to be a lot of other groups as well. Tallgrass will likely be what they are essentially for production on oil and gas. They'll be the midstream supplier of the CO2. They'll probably make a heck of a lot of money off of it. But they'll be the ones that probably supply the CO2, I would imagine. Don't quote me on that though. One Q&A, what sources is the platform using to determine land values rents? So that's proprietary to us. We use about 5 or 6 different data sets to come up with those values. And like I said, the land values themselves, as long as you're not immediately outside of the town of Longmont or Denver or something like that, and huge development potential, we're pretty darn close across the United States. I mean, I know of specific land transactions where realtors have purchased property outright, sight unseen, based off of our numbers. Now, I'm not recommending you do that, but they're that close that people be like, yeah, I mean, that's essentially what it's worth. Again, you can adjust those numbers. We're not saying that we know more than anybody with boots on the ground, because we don't, right? But that's why we leave the capability in the platform itself, when rather than looking at a property from the get-go, getting an Excel spreadsheet out and saying, okay, well, there's this and this and this and this, and there's this and there's that. And I spend, half a day or a couple days trying to really customize and figure out, well, what is this property? I can do that in a few seconds and get a really close value, but then I can go in and I can tweak it exactly the way I want. If I know that pond, that 3-acre pond is going to be, trade that acres on that 3-acre pond is going to be significantly higher than what we have it as, well, go ahead and make that adjustment, right? So they're good, they're great valuations, but they will be exactly what you want once you edit them. Bill, so for geologic carbon sequestration, do they create a pool of property owners based on the size, area, CO2 embed eject? Yeah, I would say so. I don't know if they'd create it. It'd be similar probably, Bill, to unitization. So if you look at a section or a multi-section drilling unit, where for these horizontal wells, and a lot of them are 2 miles long, they'll create a unit for the 2 sections. And anybody who owns minerals in that unit are going to get paid their proportional share of what the minerals they own for the production of the well. It's the inverse with the carbon, right? So they will create a unit or a pool based on how much volume they're going to inject, based on technical reservoir parameters of how much space they can, so how much porosity, how much is the height, what's the permeability, like how far is this thing going to go into the rock? And then they will go and they'll say, okay, well, all of the landowners in this area, they're going to get compensated, whatever it is, whatever they're offering. But yeah, it will include more than just one owner. So if you're the surface owner and you got a 10-acre tract and that's where they drill the well, and you're happy with that because you're going to get likely paid an override on that. And I would suggest if you're representing surface owners and they get a surface location on them, that you leverage and try to get an override on the production or the revenue from that carbon well. It's going to include a lot more folks than just them, because it's going to the roll front or the invasion of that carbon dioxide is going to affect a lot of the different landowners there. It's the same with wind, solar, wind, and CO2. As far as unitization, no. So solar panels, and this is, I'm glad you brought this up, Alec. Your landowners, whether they like it or hate it, it's coming. And if they are in a good area, they're either going to have solar panels on their property and get paid, or they're going to be looking at their neighbors' solar panels on their property, right? I'm neither endorsing it nor am I knocking it. I'm just telling you the truth of what it is, right? So I've seen a big mistake on the solar side where people negotiate themselves out of a deal. People will go and they thinking it's an oil and gas. It's a completely different negotiation than oil and gas. Trying to nickel and dime and get everything they possibly can and make sure they get the highest lease bonus, regardless of what operator and developer they're going with. And those folks are never going to get solar panels. They might have on a piece of paper the strongest lease, but they're never going to get solar panels on their property, but they'll be looking at their neighbors' solar panels. These pay significant. I mean, you saw some of those numbers, $500 to $1,000 per acre per year on ground that's making maybe $15 to $20 an acre grazing. It's enormous. This is life-changing type money for these folks, and for you as the realtors. You get your percentage of that when you get a lease signed. And then you can help them sell the cash flow. I mean, these are huge deals. So these are not peanut deals, but they are specific to that surface owner. Wind turbines are the same way, right? You want to make sure if you're negotiating a wind lease for your landowner, you want to make sure that you get the turbines on that property, because that's how it's paid. In most cases, there's some stuff down in Texas where people get paid for being in the proximity to wind turbines, not so much in the Rockies region. We'll do one last question here. I think we just did that. CO2 is different. We talked about that, where it's likely going to be pooled. Carbon offsets on the surface, that's paid on the specific landowner. So great questions, guys. Thank you for participating. Thanks for asking questions. We'll go ahead and wrap it up. We'll likely do another one of these, Ted. Thanks again for letting us do this. Our Wyoming RLI, thank you so much. If you guys are not a member of RLI, I would highly suggest you look into that. Great resources, great group of folks. you're not on your own with that group. So there's a ton of professionals you can lean on. Never done a solar deal. I can introduce you to a significant number of RLI folks that have. And also, if you're using us, we are your resource. So thanks everybody for joining. We'll be sending out the recording, and have a great rest of your day. Thank you. Bye.